Okay, well, ready to begin. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. My name is John Arnold. I am the events officer for BELTA, and along with Tyson and James, our president at BELTA, I was responsible for putting together this conference, which so far I think has been very, very good. Um, I'm also a teacher trainer at Thomas More University College here in Belgium. And actually my presentation today is coming out of what a concern my students had, or a concern I had about my students' preparation in terms of the reading material that they were choosing to teach with in their practice lessons. So I hope that you find it interesting, and if you have any questions during the presentation, please type them in the box underneath the slides, and I'll be very happy to answer them at the end of the presentation. So here we go. As I said, this presentation and the work that I did with this really came out of the work I was doing with my students. Sometimes I found that my students were choosing reading material that was really too high or too low for the students that they were teaching. And the problem is with beginning teachers, and sometimes with experienced teachers, is you allow your own perceptions of language to interfere with what you think the students know. So I had to find a way to give my students some guidelines, in addition to giving them tools and approaches for sometimes adapting authentic reading material. And by the concept of adaptation here, I mean keeping the content um, as authentic and natural as possible, but maybe changing the linguistic or syntactical structure a little bit so the students can comprehend it better. So I first took a look at some of the research in terms of what affects reading comprehension. And there's really three main areas. There's a lot of other areas that affect it, but these were the three main areas that I could work with my students. The first being the content schemata. What do the students bring? What is their background knowledge? Sometimes my students thought that their students knew more than they actually do. Also, the lexical background that they bring, and this was based on the work of Paul Nation, which I think most work in the lexical field is. And one of the things Paul Nation says is that for optimal comprehension, the students should be able to be familiar with 98% of the words in the text. That's a lot. We work with a variation of that number, but that's what he says for optimal comprehension. And in terms of word families, that equates to about 8,000 to 9,000 word families. So if you're teaching students at the A2 or even the beginning B1 level, they don't have that word family background at this point. So what can we do to help them comprehend better? And the other was based on the syntax, the discourse markers, the sentence complexity in the text, the variation of sentences. Are they compound sentences, complex sentences? So those are the things that we were looking at. In doing this research, it took me back to my own training many, many years ago. And one of the things we learned about was readability. I started my career as an English teacher in America before I moved here to Belgium. So I went back to the concept of readability. And what is readability? What does it do? How can my students use it? So for those of you that aren't familiar, this is just a quick summary of readability in terms of it looks at how easily someone can read and understand a text. Most readability formulas deal with the syllables, the words and the sentences, the number of syllables per words, the number of words per sentences. And the readability formula that I decided to use was the Flesch-Kincaid grade level one, which works just with that concept. The number of words per sentences, the number of syllables per words. The problem is it yields a US grade level. And so I had to work with then how do I equate this grade level to something that L2 students can understand. And so, for example, if you have a score of 9.3, that means that an American teenager in the ninth grade, which is the first year of high school, should be able to read the document. So that's what my students were working with, was this concept. So I introduced the concept of readability. But like I said, I needed then to do something with the converting the grade level, because the grade level for a native speaker necessarily does not mean that an L2 speaker will be able to read that text with ease. So I did a little bit of research on my own. This is not scientific in any way. But what I did was I looked at the Cambridge exams, and I looked at the reading passages that they used on those exams to determine what did they think in terms of readability. How did the passages that they chose, what was their readability level, and what was the range of that readability level? So this is just a very short little table that shows in terms of what I found. And like I said, this is not scientific. I hope to do more research with this later this year. But it's interesting. If you look at the A2 level, the average readability on the Cambridge exams, which that would be the KET, the first exam at the A2 level, the average was a grade level of 3. And the range was from 5th grade or halfway through 5th grade down to 1st grade. So they were very, very simple text. And then you can see that they jump up, except here in the middle, C1, B2, B1, they're very similar, or they overlap a little bit. And then there's a huge jump up at the C2 level. My students don't deal with the C1 or the C2 level. They mostly deal with the B1 and the A2 level, maybe a little bit of the B2 level. So it was the last two rows that we were dealing mostly with. So this was just a guideline. By no means is this very scientific. By no means is this set in stone. It's just for beginning teachers, they need some sort of guidelines to work in. Once they develop experience, like the rest of us, they probably would move away from these guidelines a bit. So next thing I did was I introduced them to 3 tools. Because readability, I remember when I was at university, we had to do readability studies, and we had to sit there and count all the words and then count out all the syllables, and it was a real laborious activity, which I did not want my students to have to repeat. So there's a couple really nice tools. 2 of them, the text inspector and the co-matrix, we're going to look at shortly. And then there's another one, the readabilityscore.com. And these links are in the lower right-hand corner of your screen if you want to check any of these tools out. So I introduced my students on how to use these tools. They're all very simple, and they work the same way. You simply input your text, you click submit, and then finally it gives you a readability. And this is a screenshot from the co-matrix, which was developed at the University of Memphis in America. And again, they used the same grade level scale that I was using, which was one of the reasons that I chose to use it. They do have something called an L2 equivalent, but I found in doing my research that it wasn't always consistent at this point. And a lot of the research on readability related to L2 work says just that there's almost no reliable or valid formula at this point to determine L2 readability. So I don't use this last number as much as I use the middle number with my students. So they learned how to do this, and they learned how to measure readability. And I think they were pretty surprised sometimes at the level of readability they found in some text. So let's take a look at one. You might have heard about this. This was taken from the First News, which is a newspaper in Britain written for young children and teenagers. So often it has very short articles, very in terms of things the students want to read about, things like that. So this is an article about a monkey who took his own selfie and the controversy that developed from it. I think in watching Tyson's session just before the break, somebody mentioned the monkey selfie, and this was it. So what I'd like you to do is just take a minute and read the text, and I have a little question for you. Just bring it up. I'd like you to tell me which level, A2, B1, B2, C1, or C2, do you think this text is written at? Not at what level would you use it with your students, what level do you think it's written at? So if you could just take a minute and vote, that I would appreciate that. Okay, so far B2 is winning out. Rosemary from Bolivia thinks high intermediate. Okay. Just take another 30 seconds and vote. David puts it at B1. Remember, you're voting at which level it's written at in terms of readability, the ease at comprehending this text. And while you're doing that, let me just remind you that readability is, even though it has a scientific background, it's still very subjective for our students in terms of what they bring. You know, here in Flanders, where I teach, our students are exposed to English at an early age. They come with a lot of English already in their background. Okay. It looks like a lot of people think B1, B2, a few people think C1. Okay. All right, I'm going to close the poll and show you now that this text actually has a readability level of 10th grade, almost 11th grade in America. And if we just go back to that chart for just a second, we see that that would be almost at a C1 level in terms of readability, ease that people could read it. Which is very, very interesting, because if you wanted to use this then with your students at an A2 or B1 level, they may have a harder time comprehending the text than we would actually think. So, does that surprise anybody? Elizabeth surprised? David surprised? Yeah, sometimes the shorter texts, especially coming from newspapers, have a higher readability than we imagine, because yeah, they use, it's a one sentence paragraph in some cases. They use very complex sentences. So sometimes we forget that even though maybe it looks like lexically this is not a difficult passage, syntactically it might be difficult for the students. All right, so I'd like you to take a look at this again, and I have another poll for you. And I'd like you to tell me what in this article might be difficult for a student at the A2 level. So if you could just type your answers in there, um, what what do you think? What's inside this text that might make it difficult for an A2 student? Rather long and complex sentences, definitely. That's true, Elizabeth. The content may not be completely unfamiliar, and we hope that when we choose reading text that the content is very familiar to them. They do better in terms of comprehension if they have some familiarity with the content. The passive sentences, very good, yeah. The vocabulary, the complex sentences. The nuance of the modals, definitely. Some longer, difficult lexical items as well as the lengths of sentences. Absolutely, absolutely. It's an interesting text because it's so short, but yet if we really take a look at it, um, there's a lot in this text that could be difficult for students. Yeah, that's true. Maybe for a B1 student, it'd be fine. But if we're using this for A2, I was looking to use this at an A2 level for a book that I'm working on. So that's why I was analyzing this text. All right, that's great. I'm going to end this poll and hide this. And these are some of the things that I thought. The concept of copyright. A2 students, at least at our level, A2 students in the secondary school would be about 14, 15 years old. They may or may not truly understand the concept of copyright. Selfie, um, I would hope that they do. I mean, it is the word of the year. And probably many of them have taken a selfie, but just to be sure, I might make sure that I reintroduce the term selfie. In terms of the Lexis, when I did some analysis on the text, remember Paul Nation says you need a 98% coverage. At the A2 level, this only had about an 84% coverage rate. So even lexically, there might be some problems for students. If we look at it in terms of the corpus data, then they would need upwards of 10,000 words, which is a bit over what Nation said. There's some difficult lexis in there that might stop the students. And then there's some idiomatic or dialectical, cheeky is a much more British term than it is an American term. They might be familiar with the term cheeky. Um, in America, it has a very negative connotation, which I don't think it has in Britain. And then snap a picture instead of take a picture. It's a very different use of the word snap. And so it's very idiomatic in this case. And in the whole thing, there's about 4 complex or compound sentences. And at the A2 level, we may not have done work on reading and understanding complex sentences at this point. And of course, the passive voice can always be difficult for the students. So it's real important. I was trying to get my students to look at it this way too. So we look at the readability. Once we determine the readability, then we look at, oh, this might be too difficult. What might be too difficult? And we come back to the 3 areas: the content, the lexis, and the syntax. So what can we do about it? Well, I don't know, if I was teaching this, I'd make sure that I introduced the concept of copyright and selfie. I think, especially in the internet age, we need to introduce them to the concept of copyright. They think they can just take whatever off the internet. And selfie. Sometimes you'd be surprised. Students don't have access to the internet, or not as much access as other students, or they don't have the smartphones where they can take selfies. So again, I just might introduce them to this term. What is a selfie? Why do people take it? And things like that. And why is that term being applied to this monkey? And then I would try to work the Lexis to get at least 90% coverage. If I can get 98%, which is Paul Nation's suggestion, so much the better. But I always tell my students to shoot for about 90%. And look at idiomatic expressions. Either I decide to change them, or I decide to teach them. How important do I think it is to teach them at this level, snap a picture, as opposed to take a picture? Those are decisions you make individually based on your class. Depending on the A2 level, you might decide to teach snap a picture, you may not. And syntax, maybe change some of the complex sentences into simpler sentences, and maybe try to change as much of the passive voice to active voice without hurting the content of the article. So once we identify what some of the problems are and some of the things we should do, then it becomes time for us to start working with some tools to help us do that. A couple tools that are very interesting. We saw Text Inspector earlier, which I'll show you today. You may be familiar with this one from Canada, the Lex Tutor, and one of the things they have is the Vocabulary Profile Home, which is a great tool. Oh yeah, that's a good point, Mika. Maybe they know Snapshot. You could relate Snapshot to Snap a Picture. That's a good idea. And then the English vocabulary profile site. So these might be tools that you might be familiar with, but maybe you don't necessarily know how to use. So I'm going to try to show you some ways to use them. I have some things set up on my desktop. So if you just bear with me, I'm going to switch screens for just a second, and I'm going to share my computer screen with you. Okay. First, let me show you the text inspector. The text inspector site, very easy, textinspector.com. I like this site. It's fairly new. You can see it was just copyrighted in 2014. The only problem with this site, I went to a presentation on it at IATEFL this year, and I learned that you will have to start paying for it shortly. And for access to do as many analysis as you want to, or not worried about the size of your text, it's going to be like 10 pounds or $10 a month. So it can get kind of expensive, I think. But I'll show you this one first, because right now it is free. You can register for it for free. I know I did, and I've never been sent a bill or anything, so so that's good. But like the other sites, it's real easy. You simply put in your text in here, like I did with the text on the article on the monkey. Notice I did a couple of things though. I took out all of the proper nouns. One of the things Nation says is that students will either skip over, ignore, or not be bothered with the proper nouns. So we don't necessarily need to consider them when we're considering the lexical analysis of a piece of text. So I took out the United States Copyright Office. I took out the name of the photographer, the name of the Wikimedia Commons that is going against the photographer, Indonesia. And I also took out the date, 2011, because often in these vocabulary sites, numbers don't equate to a vocabulary word. They just get thrown into the unknown, so you can often take them out as well. So you simply put your text in like this, and then you click Start Workflow, and you get a series of results. Let me just take a minute and walk you through the results. You get a view of the sentence count, the summary, the syllables per word, the average syllables, things like that, and the readability score. Interestingly, they scored this article a little lower than the other site, the Cometrics site. But statistically, they're still very close. The one thing I do like about this site is that it takes your sentences and it lays them out nice and neat for you, so you can see what sentences may be syntactically causing a problem for you. So that is nice. One of the other things it does is it links to the English vocabulary profile site. And if you're familiar with the English vocabulary profile site, it at this point it is labeling in terms of the Common European Framework of Reference. So which words are used by students at an A1 level, an A2 level, a B1, B2, C1, C2 level. Right now, this site only goes up to the B2. If it's not in one of these 4 levels, it's listed as unlisted. So you can get a summary of the various levels. So lexically, this text isn't too bad. It has a number of word or word tokens or word families at the A1 level, some at the A2 level, a few at the B1, 1 or 2 at the B2. The ones at the B2 I can try to get rid of. Maybe the B1s and the B2s is what I look to change if I need to change. And then unlisted. In terms of unlisted, the words that were unlisted in this case was the specific name of the monkeys and the word selfie. If you think that your students are okay with the word selfie, you can actually change it. You can make it an A1 or A2, B1, B2 word if you'd like. So I'll make it an A2. I'm going to assume my students are okay with the word selfie. I can change it right here in the list, and I can update it so that now I have fewer words on my unlisted. And so that one word that's left, I can maybe look to change if I need to, if I think it's going to be a problem for my students. It also will give you an analysis in terms of the British National Corpus, which word families or word tokens fall into the various groups in the British National Corpus, and then also for the corpus of contemporary American English as well. So if you wanted to, you can use those as well. I tell my students they should focus on the English vocabulary profile site. I try to make them work with the A1, the A2, the B1, and the B2 levels. That's a bit easier for them to work with. So that's nice. The other site that gives you a nice analysis is the Lex Tutor from Canada, the vocab profile home. Here's the front page, and you can go into it a couple different ways. There's the classic mode, which is the old version, or the new version, which allows you to choose how do you want to analyze your text in terms of the British National Corpus, the combined British National Corpus with the American corpus, whatever you want to do. It works the same way. I forgot to put it in. It works the same way. You input your text, you choose, in my case I chose the British National Corpus with the contemporary corpus of the corpus of contemporary American English. And so what's really nice about this and what my students really like is that it's very color coded. So when they analyze your text, they're only analyzing the vocabulary, and they tell you, which words fall into the first 1,000, the second 1,000, the third 1,000, all the way down. And these lists are actually the list based on Paul Nation's work, combined with the frequency in the British National Corpus and the corpus of contemporary American English. And so you can see that this isn't too bad. It's got almost 97% at the 4,000 word mark. So that's pretty good lexically, which actually matches with what we saw earlier with the fact that, just let me go back for a second, the fact that the majority of the words are at the A1, A2 level. So that's pretty similar. There's a few words. There's two words, one word at the 9,000 word mark and one word at the 14,000 word mark. Again, these are words I may want to change for just to make it a bit easier for my students. And there happens to be two words that are off the list. And if you scroll down just a little bit, you can see that it takes your text and it actually color codes it. So you can see, remember we had one word that was at the 9,000 level, which is pink, and that word actually is the word cheeky here. We had one word that was at that light blue, and that was the specific name of the monkeys, which we've already looked at. These are words we may want to change anyways. So it's interesting. And again, the word selfie is such a fairly new word, and actually websites as well, they're not included on the list. But again, I can say to myself, well, you know, these words are okay. Websites, they certainly know. Selfie, they'll either know or I'll teach it to them beforehand. And copyright, which falls into actually the 4,000 words, again, I can teach that concept to them before they actually have to read that. And then there's only one other word, the word debate, which again, they may or may not know. You have to decide that based on your own students. So it color codes the text, and then it actually lists for you all the words at the different levels, so you can see them. So it's a really nice tool, and my students like this tool because, partly because it's color coded, it's really easy to use, and it also is nice and easy because you can just use the back button to go back and try to change a word or two. So for example, if I want to take out the word debate, let's say, or no, let's take out the name of the monkeys and just change it to monkey, I can just go back, change it, and then analyze the text again very, very quickly. So it allows me to work in a back and forth mode. So you already see I got rid of the word at that 14,000 mark, which gives me even a better coverage, almost 97.5%, which is very, very good. So you can work with that and work back and forth, and that's what I did. I ended up taking this text and trying to get it so that it was 98% at the 4,000 mark, and I did. I actually ended up changing the word debate to discussion. I took out the name of the monkeys and just changed it with monkey. I took out the word cheeky and replaced it with bold. Again, that's a choice. You may decide you want to teach cheeky because it's such a specific and fun word for the students to use. So you can do that. So it's really nice to use. So I'm just going to come back for just a second. Stop sharing. Okay. So because the problem is when I'm sharing, I can't see what's going on in the chat box. So I just wanted to come back and see. Yeah, the picture gives them help. That's true, Elizabeth. Of course, if you were in Tyson's session earlier today, he talked all about using visuals, and that's true. You would definitely keep the picture of the monkey. And that would definitely help with some of what's going on. And you can easily pre-teach stuff on it. That's so true. So that was working primarily with the vocabulary. And the other thing that my students would have to do is then work also with the Lexis. So I'm going to go back to sharing for just a second. And before I go back to the text inspector, I just want to show you, if you don't know the English vocabulary profile site, just real quickly, you can register for this site. It's free. And you can actually type in any word that you want to determine its how they have ranked it. And if I understand correctly, I've been to a couple sessions on this. They rank the words based on students who are using them in Cambridge exams in the written parts. So they're really based on student use. So what words are being used most by students at specific levels. In any word, so for example, the word debate was one of the words we had in the text. So if I type it in, and I can search in terms of British English or an American English, depending on what I want to choose. We here in Flanders focus on British English, even though I have a terrible American accent, but that's okay. We're used to it by now. So we can see that debate, in terms of a noun, falls into the B2 level, and in terms of a verb, falls into the C2 level. So my text was using it actually as a verb. So in this case, I could decide, like I did, to take it out because that's a little bit harder for them to understand maybe the concept. Maybe. Again, what your students bring, their background knowledge, their schema is very important here in terms of making decisions. The other thing that's important, of course, is the cognates in your language. Of course, Dutch, which is the language I work with here, and English, they're from the same family. So there's some similarity. Uh, in addition, our students here in Flanders will learn French before they begin learning English. So there might be some transparency in terms of some words they know from French because French has influenced English so much. So you have to make these decisions based on your own class and based on what your students know, based on their level. Are you working with students in an academic setting, which could be the case for our students, or you're working with them in a technical setting or a more vocational setting? Those three settings could also influence the choices that you make in terms of the vocabulary. So that's very, very important. And also in terms of the language proficiency, how long you are in your course. Are you at the beginning of your course? Then you might not want to have too many B1 words, but in the end of your course, you may want to push them a little bit more and have more B1 words. So it all depends on what you want to do. Okay, so in terms of syntax, I showed you that one of the nice things about the text inspector is that it really lays out your sentences for you. And you can see which sentences might be problematic. For example here, sentence 2 is a complex sentence. And of course, it's missing the name of the photographer, the word Indonesia, and the year. You have to decide, do your students know the discourse marker when, in terms of time reference? Can they make that link? Again, if it's early in A2, they might not have it. According to the equals curriculum put together by the British Council, discourse markers like the word when are taught at the A2 level. So if this is the beginning of the A2 level, they may not have that concept yet. They may not be able to understand the sequence of that sentence. So you may have to break that sentence up for them a little bit more. The same with this one. With his camera and equipment all set up, one cheeky monkey decided to snap a selfie. This looks pretty clear with the prepositional phrase up front, but it may throw the students a little bit that the prepositional phrase comes up front, so maybe you switch things around. Here you have in sentence 4 a compound sentence, but it's missing the second subject, which for most people reading English, that's not a problem, but maybe again at the A2 level, it's not something they're used to at this point. They're used to forming compound sentences with two subjects. So it's just things to think about. So when looking at it syntactically, you have to say, where are my students at this moment? And what should I change, if anything, to help make this a bit easier. Now that I've made the words a bit easier, what can I do with the syntax? And then again, in any one of these readability sites, so like for example, using CoMatrix, which is again developed by the University of Memphis in America, you can put the text in, and what's nice again is that you can work with the text here. So I put the text in, and if I scroll down, it originally, it gave me a readability level. I think I changed this one a little bit. Yeah, I changed some of the words already. So even changing some of the words, I might have reduced some of the syllables or the words word count per sentences. So it helps the readability even a little bit more. But you can actually change some of the sentences in here and then resubmit it. And and what it does is it will actually recalculate. So let me just change the sentence. So when taking pictures of monkey in 2001, okay, so maybe we make this into two sentences. Uh, he was taking pictures of monkey, the words correctly, in 2001. Uh, and then maybe we change this into something else. Uh, his best photo uh, was not taken by him, even though that's not a great sentence. But you can change it. You can work on them different ways, and you can test the readability. All you need to do is hit submit. It will just take a minute to calculate. Notice this site does a lot of analysis. At this point in this webinar, webinar, we're only looking at the readability, but you see that they do a lot more. They look at the, oh, sorry. My session expired. I knew that was going to happen. I forgot. I put it in over here. So here's another. So I did change it around. I changed some of the sentences in here to change the readability. And I ended up getting it down to a 5.5, 5.6 readability. And so what I can do is go back to my guidelines and see, will it fit, or do I still need to do some more changing to it? So I'm going to stop sharing. And we're going to go back to the PowerPoint. And go back to that, the guidelines. So if we look here at the guidelines, we can see that if I get it at that about a 5.6, I'm just at the high range for an A2. I can leave it at that depending on where I am in my course, or I can try to get it down farther if I want. Also depending on my students. If I'm dealing with what we call ISO students here, students in the academic track, it might be okay. But if I'm dealing with students in the technical track or definitely the vocational track, it probably would not be okay. So I would want to change that. So you work with those tools, you can work back and forth, and then I can show you. I actually ended up adjusting the text a little bit to get it to that 5.6 level. So I changed the word debate to discussion, took out the name of the specific monkeys, replaced it with monkeys, put in some simple sentences, put in the past continuous, which was something that they would learn or would be learning. So did things like that, and then put all the proper nouns back in to get the text at the lower level. So those are some of the tools. Again, the links are here, but the text inspector, nice tool for looking at the connection between your text lexically with the English vocabulary profile or syntactically with the sentences listed for you. But remember, at some point, they will charge. English vocabulary profile is free. The LexTutor site is also free of charge. This one's been around for a while, and they keep making improvements. The site always gets better. It's not always great to look at that site. I think it's a little messy sometimes, but it doesn't matter because it produces really, really nice results. Yes, Tyson, it's Canadian. Those Canadians, they're amazing, I tell you. So those are some of the tools you can use, some of the things that you can do. If you have any questions, you can ask me now. There's my emails, my email addresses, my work email, my personal email. If you want to contact me for any more information about this, I'll probably be doing a more in-depth session on this later this year for BELTA. If you're interested, you can email me and I can let you know. When there's a session where people can actually try it out and do it themselves. So, are there any questions at this point? What is, does it show us the kind of level a word belongs to? Yeah, the English vocabulary profile relates it to the Common European Framework. So it relates words to the A1, A2, B1, B2, C1, C2 level, and I think they're done at this point. But remember that that site uses student data, so it's what students are using, as opposed to what truly they think should be taught at those levels. So it's interesting. You have to weigh those a little bit, I think. In terms of why are students using it? Is it because we taught them those words, or is it actually something they gain? So that's good. I have a tendency to prefer the BNC COCA list done by Paul Nation um, because they deal more with frequency of the language, and I think that they have the ability to be adapted easily based on the changes in in the language. So I hope that answers your question. Uh, any additional questions? Thanks, Cecilia. I hope you found the tools interesting. They are. I think one of my students is in here, and he did use the LexTutor site, so he might have a comment or two about using the LexTutor site. The other tools are new, and so he hasn't seen them yet. Okay, if there's no more questions, I'm going to stop the recording so that we can uh, prepare for the last session of the evening, which is Demetrius's plenary, which I'm very much looking forward to, and I hope you are as well. You're welcome, everybody. It was my pleasure. I hope it was okay. It was my first time doing it online, so I've been nervous all week, actually. Um, so hopefully it went well. But again, thank you very much, and we'll be starting in about 12 minutes with our final session of the day. Thank you.